Hello, welcome to the Untitled Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. What an exciting video I get to make for you today. If you're an Age of Sigmar fan or an Age of Sigmar player, or if you've ever been interested in general tabletop stats, this is the show for you, because today we're going to be looking at the Age of Sigmar stats for the last GHB. Now, I know what you're asking yourself, Rob, why would we be looking at the stats for the last GHB? The new GHB is underway, and we've got an entire year of this new GHB. Well, we haven't, as of yet, got enough data to really look at those stats properly, or in my opinion, enough. And it's quite nice to look back at the old GHB and actually see what a season looked like. So we're going to look at the armies, and we're also going to look at the players and be shouting out them for their achievements. I personally think, and I am really hopeful, that the stat center that we do every week is really helpful for the Age of Sigmar community. I think it's helped it grow, and it has the event scene has grown. It's not just us, obviously, but I think that really has helped. And we've seen the event scene grow massively over the past couple of years. In fact, we're looking at something like a 50% level of growth, which is great. Now, this whole thing would not be possible without two different people, Rob and Ziggy. Rob takes all of the data and trawls through it all and makes sure it's uploaded in the correct format. And then Ziggy's that kind of like stat man. And he puts it all into these amazing looking graphs, which are all available for free on the wargamer.com, and you can go check them out at any point. And when we start to get information on the new stats, we will put them up there as well. And also we track player stats, which is amazing. So players can feel rewarded for playing at events, not just like, especially if they play at multiple events, so not just playing at one, which I think is also really rewarding for the players who attend lots of events. And I like players who attend lots of events because it makes the event scene come alive, which is really helpful. Anyway, let's get straight on with the video. And the first thing we're going to look at, as you can see on the stats dashboard, is we're going to start looking at the different armies. And the first thing we're going to look at is meta participation. So all of these events, and it's 157 events in the past 6 months. The past 6 months, right? 157 events with nearly 14,000 matches, 27,000 results. So these are only 2-day events, not team events, not one-day events, just an incredible amount of Age of Sigmar events in a 6-month period, which is really cool. Meta representation is how many of each army you'll like to see at an event, which is pretty obvious. And our winner is Slaves to Darkness. So congratulations to the Slaves to Darkness in the last GHB, the most popular army, not by loads, 7.9% of the meta, with Stormcast Eternals behind. Now, seeing as Stormcast Eternals, though, as the poster children of the game, shouldn't be. It should be Cities of Sigmar. At 7.2, beating them, Slaves to Darkness, is brilliant. Especially when, like, they didn't necessarily ever struggle, but I really do think it was all of their new miniatures and all of the awesome new minis that we got, as well as them having a very, very singular play style. Like, it's not complicated. It's kind of like an Iron Jaws army. It's fairly honest. You've got units that fight really well, and then you can either make them be more tanky by making them Nurgle, or more fighty by making them Khorne. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of people are really excited about it, and I'm not surprised to see that number be so high. Stormcast Eternals in second place, Gloomspite Gitz in third place. Again, not a surprise to me. Not only they were an incredibly powerful army in the game, they're also probably one of the most popular armies. The fact that Slaves to Darkness are higher is actually really interesting, because I would have expected maybe Gitz to maybe beat everyone. But Gitz being in third place is cool. Ogre Mawtribes in fourth place is a massive shock to me. Loads of those miniatures are old. Like, they have not had like a range refresh. Their book is a bit of a copy and paste from their last book. It's not that different. There isn't a lot of like mechanics in there that are very, diverse or interesting or unique, especially compared to its last book, its last iteration, a bit like Skaven. But they're an incredibly successful army, and also, very much like Slaves to Darkness and Stormcast Eternals, they're a much easier army to get on the tabletop. You only need to paint yourself 3 Stonehorns, or Stonehorn Beast Riders and some Stonehorns, and you've got a really competent army that you can put on the tabletop. Super fun to play, really aggro, quite defensive, or like survivable probably is the right way to describe it. But most importantly, easy to get on the tabletop. Sylvaneth, 5.7% of the meta, not a surprise. Great looking army, and plays really uniquely as well. The only thing probably holding them back is the fact you have to paint up loads of trees. Soulblight Gravelords, actually a bit of a surprise to me. The Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon Neferata build, but it was amazing how many people ran out bought loads of Blood Knights, bought loads of zombies, and have featured so much. And what's also interesting as well, when we start talking about the meta representation, the fact that Slaves to Darkness and Stormcast Eternals is so high means that it's going to have the longest or the widest amount of skill expression. What this means is you have an army, it can do certain things, but if you're better at the game, you can make it do more stuff than if you're not as good at the game. Skill expression. When you have more people playing, you have more skill expression, or like more variance in skill, and so you would expect their win rates to be lower. So Soulblight Gravelords, not to blow the lead, being 5.4% of the meta, and you know, the 6th most popular army is quite interesting. KO 4.8%, Blades of Khorne 4.4%, Lumineth 4.3%, Skaven 4.1% is shocking to me. Their book wasn't, they've got no new minis, their book wasn't new or interesting, it's just the aesthetic carrying them through. That's crazy in my mind. Maggotkin and Nurgle at 3.9%, Nighthaunt at 3.9%, Ossiarchs at 3.8%, Fyreslayers at 3.4% is amazing as well. Fyreslayers really had a glow up in the last GHB. Generally considered to be not a great aesthetic. All the characters look the same, is the constant joke. But that release of that single foot character, the Flamekeeper, built this entire kind of like Fyreslayer meta where you had like rallies and units dying and the Flamekeepers proccing their ability. So it's quite interesting to see the Fyreslayers do so well, especially in popularity, most importantly, because you know, the things that are true for Gits, where their aesthetic is great, is not necessarily true for Fyreslayers, but that Flamekeeper really gave them a new lease of life. Ironjaws 3.2, Disciples of Each 3.2, Beast of Chaos 3.1, and then straight to the bottom, least represented Bone Splitters. They've effectively been soft canned by Games Workshop. They put all the points up. They didn't give them new rules. They don't write them faction stuff. They don't change their points. They're effectively been kind of like squatted without really saying it. Then Cities of Sigmar, Cruel Boys right at the bottom. Cruel Boys really weak as well. Cities of Sigmar is quite interesting being so low. And then Sons of Behemoth only 2% is crazy, when at one point they were the most popular faction in the game. So yeah, pretty interesting. Love to know what you think of the meta stuff. We're going to dive straight though into the win rates. Now the win rates are very interesting. Over 157 tournaments, Soulblight Gravelords and Kharadron Overlords tied for first spot, 56% of the meta. Now let's just take a moment to look at this GHB in a big snapshot. Anything over 55% or under 45% is a problem. It was either too weak to play or it was too strong to play. And Soulblight Gravelords and Kharadron Overlords are only 1% over our top end. It's a really healthy place for the game to be. Like, well, a lot of chat was thrown at Gloomspite Gits, who ended up at 52%, although I think the skill variance in their list is quite high. But 56% overall isn't terrible. I'm okay with that. It's not heartbreaking. It's pretty much the best the game has ever been. The people that missed out, though, under 45%, Stormcast Eternals. Not a surprise. Didn't really have many battle tactics in their book. They don't have access to as many ward saves as a lot of the current books and iterations have. They're fairly unsurvivable to mortal wounds, and mortal wounds generally have increased in the game. So I'm not surprised to see them down there. Ironjaws is a big surprise, but they're a combat army, and other combat armies can do a lot of healing. They can return a lot of units, and they also get access to a lot of good saves and ward saves. And I think the Ironjaws army just doesn't have the sustain that some of the other armies have. Nighthaunt at 43% is also, I think, a lot to do with the fact that the book is built around building itself as a castle, and it could potentially always be too good if you make some of those units too cheap, but they probably need a couple more units on the board to be really good. Bone Splitters, again, they've been soft nerfed out the game. Cities of Sigmar, they're getting a new book. And Cruel Boys, 39%. It's actually fairly criminal what's happened with Cruel Boys in Age of Sigmar generally. They were the launch army along with Stormcast Eternals in Age of Sigmar 3. They have been bad ever since. There have been people all around the world who've tried their hardest to play with them as much as possible, to do everything they can to make make Cruel Boys good, and the best they were able to do was get them at a 39% win rate, which isn't too low, but it's still pretty low. And so like it's really fair to say that they are like absolutely awful, and Games Workshop haven't really, and they've been pretty much at the bottom of the pile for nearly 3 years now, 2 years, sorry, 2 and a bit, and it's like a little bit of a shame that Games Workshop have never really made any overt effort to change that army up. I think, my personal opinion. So yeah, those are the faction win rates, but that's not all we're going to look at. Just a quick snapshot, because there's so much more info to dive into. So let's go do that now. The next chart that we're going to look at is the positive win rate potential chart. And this is my favorite chart for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, because it helps us look at skill expression. What you're looking at on the left-hand side is the meta representation. We talked about that already. On the right-hand side is how many times one of these armies had a positive win rate potential, or it went 3-2 or better. So we've got a 3-2, a 4-1, or a 5-0. And the reason that I really like this is for the exact reason we're going to talk about right now, looking at the top 2 armies on here. Heat Knights of Slaanesh and Soulblight Gravelords both have a 62% positive win rate potential, but the difference in their meta representation is significantly different. For instance, in Soulblight Gravelords, their meta representation is 5.4%. And as I said earlier, the more people who play a faction, their win rate generally tends to be lower, because the skill expression is kind of averaged out, so you settle more around a 50% mark. With Soulblight Gravelords being at 5.4%, and Heat Knights of Slaanesh being a whole 2% lower at 3% of the meta, my argument would be that it feels like players who were a little bit more experienced were picking up the Heat Knights of Slaanesh, and we saw that because the lists were generally fairly cookie cutter. Lots of Bliss Barb Archers, 1 unit Slickblade Seekers, the Contoured Epitome with the Dark Crown, all in Pretenders, and it's pretty much like the same list all the time. But that list did really well. In fact, if we go to the Age of Sigmar World Championship stats, they actually were the highest performing faction at the Age of Sigmar World Championships. That's a little bit misleading, because you do a lot of pairings, and I think Slaanesh were bought specifically to deal with Gloomspite Gits, so they had a good run because they paired into their right matchups. So it's slightly different, but gets back on course. The difference between Heat Knights of Slaanesh and Soulblight Gravelords being 2% means that probably Soulblight Gravelords were a little bit too good, because 62% positive win rate potential, one of the armies that you, or the army that you were most likely to go a successful win rate with, also had a lot of people playing that particular army, which means they were probably overcooked. Another good example would be Gloomspite Gits. They had 77.1% of the meta, and they were above that kind of like 50% mark. They were at 56%. So even more people playing this army, and their win rate potential was still quite good. It's not as egregious as some of the other armies that have happened before, but still pretty strong. So, and we already knew that Gits were like a little bit of a problem in the last GHB, so I think that's really fun as well. And then everything else just confirms everything that we knew previously. If we look at the bottom, Cruel Boys had a 26% chance of having a positive win rate potential, and that's actually really upsetting. So that's right at the bottom here. I'm kind of covering it up. It's actually super disappointing for Cruel Boys, in my opinion, because it just shows that even if you were to play them, you're not even likely to get 3-2. This is the one that I would show new people. You know, new person's like, Rob, I really want to buy, I don't know, Bone Splitters. You'd be like, dude, look, like, every player who loves Bone Splitters can't do any better than this. So you'll just have a bad time at events, so don't buy that army. Loads of people sit comfortably around the 50% mark. Ogres, Fire Slayers, Flesh Eater Courts, Lumineth Realm Lords and Big War a little bit above there as well. And then some of the other armies really struggling, like, not really struggling, but like not helping themselves. Nurgle and Daughters of Cain at that bottom section. Next thing we're going to quickly look at are the battalions used and also the grand strategies used. We didn't track battle tactics. We can't track that yet at the moment. Hopefully do that in the future. But as you can see, Battle Regiment, easily the most taken sub-battalion, which means you're going to try and take your army into one drop. In the new GHB, I wouldn't expect that to change at all. In fact, I probably would expect to see that number even go higher, because going second in many of the battle plans is such a bonus. It's been the most successful battalion always, and it's absolutely something I would like to see taken out of the game, because I inherently think it makes the game much... I honestly think it makes the game much, much better if this isn't in there, and it's more difficult to control that first turn. Grand strategies, on the other hand, we had 37% of the time we had take what's theirs. Now, obviously, that's going to the new GHB, and I think that's going to be pretty defining for what grand strategies we're going to see come into play, especially as they're a fairly large swing. Age of Sigmar itself, in scoring, if you're playing an event or even playing a game, has a pretty truncated and very close margin of win. You normally don't end up winning by like 20 points. You normally end up by winning by 2 or 3 points. So grand strategy can make all of the difference in this particular game, and the grand strategies of this new GHB are a little bit more challenging to do. So 37% of the meta, as you can see, for the last GHB really showcases that lots of these only got 0 or 1% representation. And don't forget, that's over thousands of games. So Games Workshop generally always has a best fit, and they really don't do grand strategies well. Never has this pie chart looked healthy. And never has the battalion usage looked healthy. So from a structural game design point of view, I'd like to see Games Workshop get rid of the battle regiment, and I'd probably like to see them get rid of grand strategies ultimately. I think they don't add anything to the game, and in fact, as we're seeing here, they most often are just causing themselves more of a problem and also giving haves and have-nots when it comes to these things. So get rid of these two. I think that would be a better game state. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the armies in a little bit more detail now, because there's some really interesting stuff to look at. Because while win rates is something that Games Workshop and lots of other people kind of throw out there, actually getting a more detailed dive on some of this information is actually really, really relevant. And it's something that the stats do incredibly well. And again, shout out to Rob and Ziggy for doing them, because they give us another little insight into how our armies are performing. The thing we're looking at is the Soulblight Gravelord's army. And we've got loads of information here, which is super cool, specifically about battle plan win rate. Now, I'm going to come back to this information in a moment, but the battle plan win rate is going to significantly change win rates. And it really shows you that when people say things like an army has a 20% win rate, actually it's not super relevant, because some of your armies will do really well on different battle plans, and that's really worth looking at and really worth exploring. So that's what we're going to do, but we'll do that in a moment. First, we're going to look at a couple of the standout armies. And as our most successful army on average over 6 months, Soulblight Gravelords is worth looking at. If you actually look, though, if we take out some of the factions that were doing badly, like the Avangori Dynasty and the Castelli Dynasty, they have got a 60% win rate when taking in what you would consider to be their good faction. This is where the stats start to break apart, and it becomes more about intuition and also kind of just about general knowledge about the game. So system mastery is the other term for that. Legion of Blood are easily the most chosen of the sub-factions, and you can see it there. They are the most populous as well, 45%. But they have a 60% win rate, which is way over our problem area of 55%. And there's just a couple of reasons for this, mainly because they've got access to some good abilities in Legion of Blood. Their sub-faction abilities are more of an advantage than, say, Avangori Dynasty, and so they're just much more effective in Legion of Blood. And if you look at them in their new GHB, sorry, not the GHB, in their new book, they got a massive spike towards the end. So they started out at their win rate here at number 15. Just before their new book came out, they were at 38% win rate. Then they went up to 59 and 62% win rate. So while the overall 6-month win rate for them is only 56%, their last 2 months of recorded wins leading into new GHB put them at a 62% win rate, which is a massive problem. Like, that is a legitimate, this needs to be like FAQ'd, or needs to be some points changes. And then you can really see. And also their meta representation skyrocketed. 9.3% of the meta. Absolutely huge, right? So just bonkers stuff. And they're just really, really effective. So that's just another way of like looking at the stats, and another thing worth talking about. Why is it so high? It's a great question. Probably because of the hunger on the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. That's a massive issue. But zombies are also a problem as well. All 3 of the sub-factions are actually pretty good. Vrykos Dynasty being the second one, and probably the one that you would see taken most with zombies, as a 56% win rate all on its own. But some of those things have been changed. Some of those things have been FAQ'd. So I think that they could be looked at. But they just have loads of strong units, and also loads of different builds. zombie spam works and is very effective. And also big monster hammer, specifically the Vampire and Zombie Dragon, is really effective. Ignoring Rend, like we see with the artifact that you can take on that character, and also Neferata, is just amazing. So that's why the army is so good and will continue to be good, because it's also really strong on the primary, holding objectives, which is how you score a load of points. So yeah, Soulblight Gravelords, really excellent. If, however, we use the drop-downs that you can see on the left-hand side, here where it says Battle Tome Releases, and we choose to look at this army only since its new book was released, and any subsequent games, that puts us at 208 tournament results, 1,000 matches played, and the army has a 61% win rate. Legion of Night, 65%, Legion of Blood, 62%. So that pushes our zombie build into a much higher win rate of 65%, and Legion of Blood, which is our Vampire and Zombie Dragon, into a 62% rate. But everything else is still post 60. So this is a huge problem army, and will continue to be so, as we've already seen in this GHB. Next army we're going to talk about, OCR Bone Reapers. And what we're really going to talk about is the difference between an army before they get a new book and an army post a new book. And the difference in this situation is night and day. If we look at the meta rep by month over on the right-hand side, you can see that they were cruising around a 2.3 to kind of like 1% of the meta. So not that low. Then they get their new book and they skyrocket up to 6 and 7% of the meta. Absolutely massive. Their win rates are also pretty flat. There's some spikes sometimes, but they pretty much settle across the board. But don't forget, the people playing them is incredibly low. So once you get to low enough, you get a bit of a problem. So this is all on the top right-hand graph. You get a bit of a problem in that just if one person just happens to do really well at an event, that really changes the meta. So you really want, like, it really changes the graph and the numbers, so it's not quite as effective. When they get up to 7% of the meta, which as we know puts them in about 3rd or 4th place, and they're at a 55 to 62% win rate, as they have been here, we're seeing a significant uplift in how effective they are. Lots of people playing them, lots of different skill expression, but also doing incredibly well. OCR Bone Reaper is going to be a real problem in the new GHB, and they are doing very, very well. So definitely worth looking at in that information as well. And why are they good? Very survivable, multiple different sub-factions that do quite nicely, lots of healing, lots of recursion. If you were just to look at a Stormcast Eternals army and an OCR Bone Reapers army, they're night and day. Stormcast Eternals have a good armor save, a bit, and they can fight. Whereas OCR Bone Reapers have the same thing, but you can heal vast swaths of OBR, which you can't do in Stormcast. So the difference between the two is really interesting. And it really showcases an old book and a new book, and how just adding an additional bit of recursion into an army, or quite a lot in this case, really makes this army better. And these are just a hugely strong army. One army I'd like to talk about in detail is going to be Gloomspite Gits. And that's because Gloomspite Gits, when they were released, were considered to be, like, broken. They're going to destroy the meta. They're going to destroy the game. And it's quite nice to look at this, like, kind of in post. Lots of the units are too cheap. We've had points updates. We've had FAQs since. Do I think Gloomspite Gits were good? Yes. Do I think they were a tournament winning army? Yes. Do I think they were oppressively good? Maybe they were a bit of a problem. But I don't think they've ever reached what I would consider to be oppressive levels, which we've seen in the past, with like Sinesh, this is a few years ago, and definitely Gargants, which we saw a couple of years ago as well. And here's my evidence for it. Again, I definitely think that they were a little bit too good. They were too cheap in certain places, and they had some problems, definitely. So let's talk about this. So when the book was released, they immediately went from around 3% of the meta up to 7 and 10% of the meta. And as I've already discussed before, when you have more players playing, you have a wider skill set. And therefore, the win rate is lower than it should be. Their win rate spiked up, 53%, 55%, and the one big problem month of 58%. Well, I mean, if we do it by months, they only ever hit a 55% if we do it by month, versus Battle Term releases, 51, 52, 54, and 49. They hit about 8% of the meta as well. So while they had a lot of people playing, they never really spiked up. I'm going to just stick an arbitrary 5% on this and say that if we take out kind of the low skill expression, this army was pushing towards more of a 60% win rate, which is too good, don't get me wrong. But looking at this graph, what we saw was loads more people pick up the army, loads more people play the army, and we saw the army be really, really good, but not crazy good. Definitely too good, definitely needed FAQs, definitely needed points changes, but not aggressively too good. And I think what's interesting about this is this doesn't take into account all of your Spiderfang players, those sweet chestnutters that I love, yeah, and all of your troll players, so your Troggoths, which really didn't need any points changes in the latest Battle Scroll update, because a lot of this was Jaws and Mork. If we go back and look at our meta representation, 47% of the lists in this since that book was released were Jaws and Mork armies, almost half. Then it was King's Gits, which arguably were also going to be Squig and Goblin heavy, and then Glog's Mega Mob was only 18% of the meta, and Glog's Mega Mob only had a 51% win rate. So they really didn't need any point changes. They were effectively perfect. And so keeping them there, it would have been really nice to see. So I think Gloomspite Gits is such an interesting kind of case study for Age of Sigmar at the moment. New book, new lease of life, got loads of play, definitely some stuff too cheap, definitely some stuff too strong, but because it's an army that's made up of a variety of different factors, balancing those has been a little bit more difficult, and changing those points around has been more difficult for Games Workshop as well. I don't think that they've done an overly good job, actually, in the Battle Scroll update, but there we are. It's really interesting to look at that, my personal opinion. So it's super fun. The last thing I'd like to talk about when it comes to the stats, especially for the last GHB, is I would like to talk about how important events are going to be in this GHB, and most importantly, picking the right battle plans in this GHB are going to be. Because when we do look at graphs like this, and Games Workshop presents graphs like this, the faction win rates, they do this a lot, mainly because it has a lot of information that they obfuscate or they don't really showcase. But us as players, we want to learn a load of stuff about the game, and we really want to understand how they work. Yeah, and if you ever are going to submit lists, the T-Sport Stats Center, then please make sure you always send all the battle plans that they played. We do have a T-Sport Stats Center Twitter, or X, or whatever the fuck it's called now. But go check there and send the battle plans when you play it. And why is this so important? Okay, let's look at that graph. Watch what happens when I click the Jaws of Galette. Immediately, the graph changes aggressively. Okay, now the most successful armies that we've seen are Caradron Overlords and Hedonites of Slaanesh. Soulblight Gravelords drop, how much do they drop by? They drop by 8% as a win rate. Significant, massively significant. OCR Bone Reapers tumble from 53% to 38% of the as a win rate. Some armies go up pretty aggressively. Slaves to Darkness and Iron Net Deepkin hit up to 53 and 54% of the meta, with Flesh Eater Courts becoming a 57% win rate army, putting them in like third place. Sons of Behemoth get 58% as a win rate. So important, but let's swap it around and let's do ours for the taking. Okay? Everything changes. Caradron Overlords jump up to 61% of the meta, as do OCR Bone Reapers. So between those two battle plans, OCR Bone Reapers has nearly a 20% win rate difference. Just those two battle plans. And so if you go to an event with OCR Bone Reapers, as an example, and it doesn't have Jaws of Galette, but it does have ours for the taking, you're in a better position to potentially win the event. And so taking this information in, especially over the course of a year, is going to be really interesting for TOs on what missions they choose, because that's going to really change up how, who wins, who does well at events, which I think is, again, really interesting. Again, if you click any of these, all of the numbers change again and again and again. And that's really important. Really important, because while the win rates are so cool, it's really fun to talk about, and it's a nice shorthand for how an army is roughly doing. All of this stuff really helps you, in my opinion. Like, it really lets you know, I just can't seem to do well with my Bone Reaper army on this battle plan. That's because your Bone Reaper army doesn't do well on this battle plan. So there you go. I hope you've enjoyed kind of the look at the stats. I know it's just a snapshot of what happened in that GHB that's just gone, but all that information is available. I include it in the notes if you're listening to this podcast or watching on YouTube, so you can click those things. And I want to really encourage you to shout out everyone on the T-Sports Stat Center crew, so Rob and Ziggy. They do this incredible thing. They give us resources, which I don't think even 40Chaos resources this effective. Definitely not resources that look this good. I've said this time and time again, Age of Sigmar is like a crowdsourced game. Sure, Games Workshop make it, but we as a community have always kind of like done stuff around the edges. You got the Weird Knobs guys making these templates and all of this information cards that we use to play in games. You obviously got the stats guys doing all their stat work as well. You got blogs and posts, and you got Goonhammer doing blogs, and Plastic Crack doing blogs, which are great if you want to go read them. And there's so much good information and resources to play the game better, but also to make the game more relevant and fair, which I think is interesting as well. So I want to shout out all those people. They're great people, and they deserve your love. So if you get the chance to shout them out, then please do. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Share it with your friends. Share all this information. The community can only get better if we all have more information. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much.